Hi there. 21.1 is basic definitions. What we're going to start with is the distance formula. We use the distance formula to find the distance between 2 points on the coordinate plane. So the distance formula is it's going to be distance equals the square root. Now when you have 2 points like the ones below, we have the x1 and y1 just like in the slope formula. What we're doing here is taking x2 minus x1 and we're squaring that, and we're adding it to y2 minus y1 and then squaring that. So to use the distance formula, in the next example, we want to find the distance between the 2 points to the nearest thousands. So we let one of the points be x1 and y1, and the other point be x2, y2. And then we just substitute in those 4 values into the formula above. So we'd have the distance is equal to, we have x2, which is -2 minus x1, square that, and then we want to add it to y2, which is -5 minus, now we want to be careful because we're subtracting a -1, and then close that parenthesis and square it. From here, you can use your calculator and type all that in. Just be careful with your typing in the parentheses and the negatives. So we have -2 minus 3, close the parentheses, square, and we're adding that to a -5 minus a -1, close the parentheses, square it again, and we're getting an answer of 6.40312, round to nearest thousand, so it would be distance is equal to 6.403 would be our distance. Now, we can also take 2 points and calculate the midpoint, which would be the point that's halfway in the middle of those two. The formula for the midpoint is we want to take the x values of our coordinates and find the average of them. So we're going to add the x's together, divide by 2, and then we find the average of the y. So add them up, divide by 2. And that's going to be a coordinate just like we'd have an x, comma, y, because the midpoint is a point that's halfway through. So now what you want to do is find the midpoint of the points that we used in example 1. So we substitute those values in, so we get 3 plus a -2 divided by 2, and we get -1 plus a -5 divided by 2. And we simplify, so we get 1/2, comma, -6 over 2, which we know we have 1/2, -3. This would be the midpoint between those 2 points from example 1. Now, the next one we have is slope. Now, we talked about slope when we looked at chapter 5 stuff. We know the slope formula we already talked about is m equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. What is the slope though? It's the difference in the y values divided by the difference in the x values. So it's the difference in the y values divided by the difference in the x values. Okay, moving on to the next page. Example 3 says find the slope of the line passing through 3, -5 and -2, -6. What I want you to do is 2 things for this one. First, I want you to plot these 2 points, draw your line, and then use the slope formula and find your slope. So go ahead, pause the video, and do those 2 things. Okay, we sketch our line, and then when we also find the slope by hand, we notice that the slope is 1/5. We can also see that if we start at this point, we move up 1 and over 5 places to get to the next point. Now what I would like you to do is try this again. I want you to plot these 2 points, sketch your line, and then find the slope using the slope formula. So go ahead and try that one. You will notice that when we find the slope of this, we also get a 1/5 for this one. And then when we look at it, we can tell that these lines, they're going to be parallel to each other. So what do we, the next thing here says, what do we know about parallel lines? We're going to say that they have the same slope. They have the same slope, however, we do notice that they have to have different y-intercepts or else they'd be the same line. So we're going to add that too. They have to have the same slope, different y-intercepts. The next thing, what do we know about perpendicular lines? Well, if we were to create let's go with a line that connects two of these points that we created, one from each. What I've created here is going to be a perpendicular line to these other two lines that we have already graphed. So I want to look at the slope of this yellow line that I just graphed here. If we start at this point right here, now it's not exact, but it's as close as I could get with this. If we want to go from this point to this point, and we want to look at the slope, we know that we have to go down 5 places, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and over 1. That means that our slope of this line is a negative 5 over 1, which simplifies to just a negative 5. So now when we look at the slope of the line that's perpendicular with the other line, we notice two big important things. One is negative, one is positive, so they have to be opposites each other. So they have to be opposite. The other important thing is that they're flipped over. So meaning here we have a 1 over 5, here we have a 5 over 1. We call that reciprocals. So they have to be opposite reciprocals. The other thing we could say about them is if we take these two values, 1/5, and we multiply it by a negative 5, we end up with a negative 5 over 5, which is a negative 1. All perpendicular lines, their slopes will always have a product of negative 1. So we could say this, or we could say their slopes have a product of negative 1. Okay, example 4 says show that the line passing through the points 3, negative 5 and 2, negative 7 is perpendicular to the line that passes through 4, negative 6 and 2, negative 5. So we have to do two things here. One is we need to take these 2 points here and find the slope. And then we have to take these 2 points and find the slope of those and just prove either of these two things. They both will be true, but you just want to make sure you state one or the other. So go ahead and find the slope of those and state that it's true. So we can see that the first pair of points, we get a slope of positive 2. The second pair of points, we get a slope of negative 1/2. We notice they are opposite reciprocals. Also, if we multiply them together, they have a product of negative 1. Either of those would work. So now what I'd like you to do is pause the video, and I want you to try these two practice problems at the bottom, and then unpause it and check your answers. Okay, so for number 1, I rounded to nearest thousands place just like we did previously. On the exam, I will be very specific about rounding. So we get the distance equal to 11.402. And then number 2, the slope of a line perpendicular to these points. Well, these points would have a slope of 9 over 2. So perpendicular, the opposite would be a negative reciprocal, 2/9. Okay, that's all we have for this section. Reach out with any questions. Thank you.